My midheaven is in a fire sign. So I decided, we'll talk a bit about Sagittarius and by extension fire signs. I also have another planet transiting my midheaven. Just not necessarily in the same sign, but I know it's, kind of in the ballpark within the sign and at least within a conjunction, if not the sign itself. In fact, I think it might have just be right before the sign or past the sign. I'd have to double check. However, with me as a midheaven in the fire sign, I could be a bit projective with my goals. And if I sound a little froggy right now, it's because I need to blow my nose. Got some dirt and stuff caught in there. I'm doing some work and it's kind of dry out here. So, yeah. Back on the topic. So, with a fire sign midheaven, I could be about a bit projective and idealistic as far as my career goals. Not always the most, I would say, down to earth. And definitely not always the most ethically or legally right avenue. Ethics and morality being subjective. One person's good is another person's evil. One man's heaven is another man's hell. And so the story goes. However, so I talk about a few things today. So, first thing is the difference between Sagittarius, Leo, and Aries. So, with Aries is more of, Aries just kind of wants to start shit. And Aries is also the punisher. So is Leo. Aries is kind of the one that, in a way, Aries almost likes to make a dilemma just so, they have an excuse to punish. Aries does this a lot. You'd be surprised how many people and how often they like to make dilemmas, just so they can use that as an excuse to punish somebody. Because Aries wants blood, and Aries wants it fast. And Aries wants a lot of it too. Leo is more just, on the side of pride. And even a bit narcissistic, the center of attention. And may do some things to protect said pride and honor, oftentimes in which defending the honor and pride comes at the expense of taking someone's life or limb, usually with some kind of vengeance. Now, Sagittarius, well, when you look at Sagittarius in this picture, it's firing the arrow forward. That's towards Capricorn. Capricorn being the limitations and boundaries. And, Sagittarius, the horseman, just kind of riding around, breaking all the boundaries. So you got the man and the horse, right? The horse can travel very quickly on flat and dry land. And the man, well, he can climb and get around the little narrow corners and alleys and whatnot. So yeah, there's that. In fact, you can see in this picture here, he's got a little bit of what looks to be a lion's tail on the end. And his head being sort of almost the horns of Capricorn or even Aries. And the bow kind of looking like a scale of Libra. I might be stretching a bit much in this one. Oh, and you can see the tails. It's almost like Scorpio, isn't it? Mm-hmm. I'm just saying. You gotta look at the image here. I just kind of picked this one out randomly, and turns out it's got a lot of the correspondences there already. Good for the video. These kind of things happen. Subconscious gets linked up, and boom, it's just going away. For a lot of the, rituals and stuff that I do, I don't even bother to look at the ephemeris or figure out the astrological timing for that specific date or hour. Usually I'll just do the planetary day at most and the planetary hour, since I have them pretty well memorized. You know, and I do the 24 hours, so I go from midnight to, 23:59. I don't do sunrise to sunset. I know, if you're more solar based, you're going to do that, but I'm more of a, I guess you could say other star and lunar/Jupiter based. Now, if you're working more with Sun and Saturn, it might be more important to do from sunrise to sunset. I don't really follow said traditions. Yes, I do pull a lot of my workings from some rather, Saturnine and both solar religions, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. And I do read, scripture from all three of them, albeit mostly, the latter two. I mean, don't get me wrong, I take stuff from the Old Testament too, quite a bit of stuff. There's a lot of overlap with them anyways, so that's a topic for another discussion. You can see some on Gnostic Quran and Dot Darling. Did a previous video on her, and you can even go check her out. But they both got good stuff. Gnostic Quran, Dot Darling, and some guy, I think his name was Wazifa. He's on the Warburg Institute. They have a good little video on that. I'd suggest you check them all out. As for, the Bald, EA, and, well, I'm not sure what happened to EA lately. I've seen a few of his interviews and podcasts with other people, but as to his own original channel, I haven't seen much lately. I've seen some stuff with Espen K, and I've even, had a few books by him, mostly the books of Smokeless Flame. And let me tell you, those entities, they are not meant to be taken lightly. Make no mistake. Those ones can really ruin your life and the lives of those around you. Even if you wanted to, it can usually backfire in some pretty hideous ways. I don't recommend baneful magic at all. And even if it's not baneful magic, it can very quickly lead to some pretty nasty consequences. I'm just saying. Proceed with caution. So, I had to clear my throat again. It's really dusty. It's fairly dry and dusty for, December. So, more on Sagittarius season. Right now, every time there's a fire season, I got big ass plans and big ass changes. And I can really put myself into it while not always having, all the resources. Because the opposite of fire signs is, the air signs. Gemini, Libra, and Aquarius. Now, see, with Leo, it's the center of attention and everything, right? Sort of projective. Now, Aquarius is a bit different. Aquarius is all just air. It's fixed air, so there's big ideas, but, not always the most, there's not always an easy avenue of approach that's just so easily available. So, a lot of Aquarians actually do get into these practices. And, a lot of times these Aquarians will, have to take some, necessary means against, the honor of Leo. The honor and the ego of Leo. Sometimes Aquarius just needs to, go right in their face, grab the jaws of the lion and rip its head off. Now, mind you, the lion's still powerful. A eunuch male. That's what happened in the, astrological. The Clash of Titans. Saturn, he snips and castrates Uranus. Just saying. And this was like after he already, did his pleasure with Gaia and a few other ladies as well. Funny enough, Jupiter then ends up coming along and he kicks Saturn's ass and then ends up having a bunch of his own kids. Yeah, he also had to free up his siblings because, Saturn was a bit greedy in that regards. Grumpy old fuck. Anyways, so yeah. Sagittarius, if you like that. Well, Sagittarius is the opposite of Gemini. See, Sagittarius is long distance. And it's broad strokes. Not always the most planning involved. Just kind of goes in and does shit. And Sagittarius just wants to expand. What's in front of Sagittarius is Capricorn, ice, Saturn, Mars in Capricorn. Well, that's honor and justice. Think of the vigilante. Sagittarius just burning right through it. Think of, back in the olden days, you'd have these nomads and they'd be riding horses. And, you had Attila the Hun and you had Genghis and everyone else. So what did they do? Well, they went into these cities, you burn them down, kill everyone inside, and, have your fun. Smash and pass. Smash, smash, pass. And then if you find any herbs, well, then you puff, puff, pass. And, they didn't really believe in the ownership of land. I mean, they were pretty tolerant of anything. They didn't really have their morality or anything. They were just pragmatic, and they never really even had their own civilization. So usually they'd have to be mercenaries for other civilizations or just adapt their culture when they invaded whatever places they invaded. I actually went to Istanbul, Turkey about a few years back, give or take. Yeah, no, really nice place. You can see the Sagittarian and just the overall Jupiterian energy. I mean, for one, it's right next to the Mediterranean and Black Sea. You can see the Piscean influence, and the lunar Cancerian influence, because there's stray dogs and cats everywhere. They treat them like family there. I kid you not. And some of them are pretty fat from all the food they give them. Just lay there in the sun, on the pier, just being fat. Anyways, good food too. Beautiful place. So then there's the religious mixture, the ethnic and cultural mixture, the mixture of different languages and cultures and continents. Well, that's Jupiter, Sagittarius and Pisces, and by extension Cancer, because Jupiter's exalted in Cancer, for the pets and everything. They really like their animals. And, the good weather too. Humid, but still pretty good. It's all just mixed together. It's very crowded and mixed. A little bit on my trip. So more on that in a bit. Now, after I'll have to jump some topics again. As with Sagittarius season, well, that's kind of what it is, right? Forgiveness, love, and the what forgiveness and love entails is, well, that oftentimes entails that yes, there's going to be some enabling. You're going to enable, criminals and people that just don't care. In a way, you're sort of, helping out the Aquarians, so to say. You saw in the Bible, the man with the vase of water. Well, that's Aquarius right there. Jesus, forgiveness, spreading the word through love and compassion, not through violence and, bloodshed and hanging people and, castrating them or torturing them. No, Jesus was entirely against it. He wanted to spread the word through love and forgiveness. Likewise, this is also why, in prison systems, the religions of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam attracted so many, criminals. That was the early days. It was, these religions, they attracted criminals, prostitutes, homeless people, Because, that's one of the consequences of forgiveness is some people just means, whoa, if you have to forgive me, then I guess there's no punishment. Ho, ho, ho. I mean, it's kind of true, at least for humans, it is not allowed. Now, as for what, the God, Father does, well, that's the Lord's vengeance. You'll have to answer to him. And sometimes, he ain't so nice. He can bring down a pretty heavy smackdown. I remember a few years back, I was a pretty angry dude. I had a little episode where I was extremely angry. Like, I was mad. I literally wanted to just kill somebody, and I'm sending out threats and I'm like cursing them and harassing them. Thankfully, it never, escalated to anything violent or, physical harm, trespassing, anything like that. It was just, me talking shit back and forth with these people. Well, long story short, I paid a very heavy price for that with both my health and finances. It was more of, something along the lines of, things that were completely unrelated just happened to happen, and then they all kind of just, played out in a very synchronistic way to tell you, hey, you fucked up this time. You done screwed up, son. You better learn your lesson. And I said, all right, I'm gonna learn. It's not the first time that I've, violated one of a very serious covenant. And make no mistake, when you violate a covenant like that, and I've had contracts of, blood, and I've had blood contracts. I've had some very strong friendships, and in one of them I violated our covenant very dearly. It was because of, love of something else. For it's the love of money that's the root of all evil. And it's the worshiping of the golden calf, Taurus. This was a friendship and a bit of an organization where we were doing some, rather unacceptable things by mainstream society. And also a bit on the shady end. So, there's the Scorpio aspect to it. I have some major placements in Scorpio. Almost a stellium, but, if you want to count Pluto, then yeah, it is. But, Pluto it's a bit out there. Yeah, and there's some other stuff in Scorpio. And I have one, I think I have two. I have a lot of stuff in Scorpio, actually. And Taurus, not so much. Cancer, definitely. Yeah, I got a lot of stuff going on in my water signs. They are very busy. My fire signs, a little less. Earth signs, yeah. Air signs, oh yeah, definitely as well. Not as much as the water signs, though. So I think this is just turning into a bit of a, run on rant, whatever, but, end of the year update. Oh, yeah, I'll just go with the typical end of the year updates. End of the year update number one. I've been saving up for some big plans, so, you know, I decided I was going to take that extra time that I'm not spending, by wasting my money without talking to you guys. And this is part of why I give to you the knowledge that I give and the experience that I give. Because I made some pretty big mistakes in the past. I mean, I would say I did some pretty bad things in the past. Now, I would rather avoid regretting the past because, well, if, the divine mind, the, divine universe is ultimately what, sets everything in motion, including, the things that me and you do on a regular basis, then regretting the past and saying, well, I wish I would have done this or that, you're kind of saying that, the divine, the universe, they don't know what the fuck they're doing. So, I mean, I guess if you believe in this higher omniscient power and omnipotent and, everything else, omnibenevolent, if you believe that, the Lord is good, the universe is good, well, then you have to accept everything that happens in the universe. Because, it always happens, for better and worse. That'll be about it. We're nearing towards the end of Sagittarius season, so we'll see each other soon.